they would kind of talk trash and say, David's stupid. Like, he loves working.
That's David Greene, host of the #1 rated Bigger Pockets Real Estate podcast with over 110 million downloads. David's a multi-millionaire, and he has some really good advice about how anyone can start from scratch and build massive amounts of wealth.
If you are listening to this and you want to be wealthy, there's 3 things that you're going to have to focus on.
In this episode, you'll learn how to play offense and make a lot more money.
You have to be good at certain things in order to make money.
How to play defense and keep a lot more of the money you make.
I knew that if I was able to save $500 a week, that translated to $24,000 a year.
The light bulb moment when David learned how to recycle his cash using the now famous BRRRR strategy.
I would never buy this house and put 70% down on it. What would happen if I refied it?
And how to avoid losing it all financially. And now we're going to dig into all of that and more. David, welcome to the show. Congratulations on book number 6. That's incredible.
Thank you, Chad. Yeah, I got to the point where I'm kind of just like constantly writing a book in between meetings and other things that I'm doing. I've told the publishing company that when you're in like book writing shape, you got to just keep writing it. You don't want to get out of shape and have to get back into it again.
It's like a marathon, ultra marathon, right? You just got to keep on running. Otherwise you'll get stuck.
That's right. Don't stop to tie your shoe.
I'm impressed. Well, I look forward to talking about this book. And the first thing that kind of struck me as someone who's an athlete, I know you've been in athletics as well. You picked a topic of building wealth over this long journey, which kind of like telling somebody they need to get into fitness or go on a diet is long, it's uncomfortable, it's hard, and you didn't really sugarcoat that. So how do you sell something that is kind of like going on a diet or, starting to go to work out at CrossFit?
I think that's the problem is it's hard to sell if we're just being honest here. In our space, there's a lot of people that are influencers that sell education, that sort of like promote, hey, here's what I did. Let me teach you how to do the same thing. And it is very tricky for the person who's listening to this content and thinking, okay, I want what Chad has. I want what David has. I want what one of these guys did. Tell me how to do it. Similar to how you or I might look at somebody with a really good physique in the gym and say like, hey, I want to look like that. What are you eating? What are you doing? It's a natural thing to think. The problem becomes when the people that are hiring us aren't actually looking at our bodies. They're just seeing what we tell them. So someone says, hey, I bench this, my body fat is that. There's no way it can ever be proven. You don't know. You just see what the internet's telling you. It becomes very easy to present what you're offering in the light that you want it to appear in. And a lot of it's not true. So I wrote this book to basically kind of dispel as much of it I could for whatever audience I had and people that listen to me and trust me, to set the record straight here that investors often make themselves look better than they are to sell their products, and that can be very harmful for the people that are following them. I remember the Liver King. You know the Liver King? You've heard of him? Mm-hmm. He was very popular for a while there. He has a ridiculous physique, and he talked about how he doesn't take any kind of steroids, nothing unnatural. He simply eats liver and organic foods and suns himself naked and puts his feet into the earth. And because he does that, he looks like this. And he had this whole system that he was selling to people and making a ton of money off of the supplement brand that he had. And the problem for me is that if you're a young man and you're looking at him and you're thinking, I don't look like that, what am I doing wrong? There's something wrong with me. I must suck. You get all this shame because this person's telling you I don't take steroids and I just put my feet in the dirt and get the sun and eat the right foods. And someone does that and they look like a normal human. Well, they're going to think something's wrong with them. The same thing happens in our space. There's people that are working their butts off, trying to get ahead. They're not finding those deals where they're making $100,000 really easy. They're not finding those deals with a 30% cash on cash return like what they're seeing on Instagram or on YouTube. And they think there's something wrong with them. Yep. And this book was basically just a blueprint of what I did to build wealth and become a multimillionaire. And it is not surprising. It turned out that the Liver King was actually on steroids. He was cheating, right? Yeah. And a lot of the people in our space that make all this money, they don't make it from buying the real estate. They make it from selling the courses. They make it from the communities they're putting together. They make it from all the hype that they get, that they talk about, and then they sell. Then they make $500,000 on a program they have, and then they go buy a property cash. And then they tell you that their property makes all this money. Well, they pay cash for it. And the normal person paying for that course can't do the same thing. And I see all the shame and the pain that it's causing in a lot of people having this false impression that they're given.
Yeah. Well, I respect the approach, and I imagine that it's still doing well, but for whatever, even if there's a short-term ding, I love the long-term, and I respect that. And particularly someone who has been in athletics and played, in college football, there's just no shortcuts. There's, if you want to actually perform, which is what real estate investing is, and that's the point you're making, you've got to go really to the principles, to the fundamentals. And I love how you shared your own journey among that. So can you unpack what those pillars are? I want to get into your journey, if you don't mind, and just talk about your story, but what are the pillars, and so that we don't have to look at the glitzy Liver King steroid stuff and actually get some real principles here.
There's really 3 pillars that lead to building wealth. And if you are listening to this and you want to be wealthy, there's 3 things that you're going to have to focus on. And they're very simple. But if you turn your attention every day to how you improve in these 3 things, it will be impossible not to become wealthier. Just like if you focus on eating the right foods and working out as hard as you can every time you go to the gym, it will be impossible not to become more fit. The first pillar is defense. This is practicing how much of your money that you make you can save. It's having self-control. It's having delayed gratification. It's avoiding lifestyle creep. It is not easy. I talk about this in the book. There are companies that hire people much smarter than you and I, whose full-time job is to figure out how to trick somebody into spending their money on something. And we live in this matrix where this is hitting us constantly. And we don't consider it because we don't realize that we have an enemy. There is a person who is thinking every day, how do I separate David from his money? And if I'm not waking up every day thinking the same thought, how do I keep my money from those people? I'm going to lose that battle. Just like if you're having a football game and someone hands you the football and you don't know someone's coming to tackle you, you're losing 100% of the time. It would be foolish to get in a game and not understand what the opponent's trying to do. For whatever reason, nobody in our space talks about saving money. They don't talk about defense. They don't talk about budgeting. They don't talk about controlling your spending or having a plan for your money. The second pillar is offense, and this is the one talked about even less than defense. There's actually a skill to making money. You have to be good at certain things in order to make money. And the wealthy people that I know made good money. They brought value to the marketplace. They honed their skills. They did something hard, got good at a service that they could offer to the community, and they made money, whether it was through their employer, whether it was through their clients, if they started their own business, whether it was through the market itself. They did something. And there's several chapters in the book that are geared towards the things you have to learn to be good at making money. And then the third pillar is investing. Now, most of our community really understands this. That's why they're listening to this content. They want to be a real estate investor. The problem is when we go to the successful investors and say, Chad, I got no money, no job, no skills, no life, no drive, no credit, no down payment. How do I buy real estate? And there's someone out there that's going to say, well, use my system where you don't need money. You don't need skills. You don't need hard work. You can just go figure out a way to make money in real estate without those things. And it is possible. It can happen. You're going to get a genetic freak every once in a while that hits the lottery and they don't work out as hard as other people and they get ahead. But usually it's like for a specific time in their life when they're in their young 20s where you can get away with eating whatever you want and still be successful. But when you're in your 40s and 50s, it will not work that way. Those are not the principles that are going to carry you.
Preach it. I'm learning this at 44.
Yeah, exactly. Like there were a lot of people that in the last 8 years, they bought real estate 8 years ago. You just made a buttload of money without trying very hard. The market carried a lot of investors. Well, now you get into the space where people are talking about all of their accomplishments and they're saying it like someone can now go do it in today's market. And if you're paying attention, those opportunities are not there like they were 8 years ago because the government's not printing money like it was 8 years ago. We don't have incredibly low interest rate. We had every single thing working in the favor of real estate that existed possible 8 years ago. So of course people did well. Just like a 21-year-old is going to be in really good shape if they go to the gym twice a week and they can still eat cheeseburgers. But that is not something that's going to last for your whole life. The economy we had 8 years ago is not going to last forever. If you want to actually build wealth, you got to focus on defense, offense, and investing.
Yeah. Speaking my language. Love it. I want to go to your story, David. The very beginning, particularly, a lot of people are new investors. They're getting started. They get this. All right, I'm going to have to do something a little bit different. You started, I want to go all the way back to college and to talk about how this offense, defense, and eventually the investing worked. And you had a job as a waiter at a restaurant, if I remember that right. what was your motivation at that point? Because as I understood it from reading the book, you were doing these things. You were playing defense. You were saving money. You were also learning skills aggressively. You're trying to figure out how to be good at whatever you're doing. But I want to go back in the mind of David at whatever age you were then starting, just to kind of give people an idea what kind of mindset you had.
I basically looked at myself and I realized if I want to make money, it's going to have to be with the opportunities I have in front of me. I wasn't raised in a white collar family. There were not wealthy mentors around. I wasn't going to be going to an Ivy League school, but I didn't see myself as a victim. It was just like, that's what it is. This is the cards that I've been given. It was the same with sports. Like I'm 6'1", so I'm taller than the average person, but for basketball, that's not very tall, right? I'm more athletic than the average guy. For a basketball player, I was not that athletic. Like you put me up against D1 players, man, I'm getting smoked. It is very hard to keep up with that level of athleticism. But this is the body I got. This is what God gave me. So how do I play the best basketball I can with what I have? I brought that same attitude that I learned in basketball into work. Okay, I live in a small town, Manteca, California. What's the best job I can get? It's probably going to be working at a restaurant and trying to get tips. There weren't other opportunities for an 18 or a 19-year-old. So I went into the restaurant every day and wanted to work as hard as I could. I prayed before I went in there. And I would just pray every day, God, help me not to make mistakes. Help me to stay focused. Help me to anticipate things going wrong. Help me to have a good attitude. Help me to stay ahead. And Chad, this was a hard restaurant to work at. We had no food runners. We had one busboy for the entire restaurant with 5 or 6 waiters. We had to make our own soups, make our own salads, hand toss the dressing, prepare all of our own foods. You had to do everything pretty much yourself, run your own drinks. It was crazy. And there was no computer. So it all had to be handwritten on a ticket. You had to memorize the price of the food and handwrite it on the ticket and then add it up with the calculator to give it to the guest. There was no computer printout that we had. And if you messed up, the boss looked at every single ticket at the end of the night, added them all up, and came back to you to collect the money that you didn't charge for the guests, right? So there was actually some consequences there. And I was 18 years old working a job with 30 and 40-year-olds. This is how people were taking care of their families. And I was kind of put into what I thought was the big league. So I had to push myself. I had to learn how to use the principles that I learned in basketball in the restaurant industry, right? How do I keep myself working hard the whole day, not just part of the day? Don't ever give up on a play. How do I think ahead? Okay, this is what I'm doing now. What's the next thing that's going to be happening? I can't just get caught up in this one conversation with this guest. My food's going to be coming up. Another table is going to be needing something extra. I got to get steak knives out to these people. Whatever the case may be, you have to kind of think ahead. And it was a hard job to have. I know it sounds silly to talk about a restaurant like that, but there would literally be plates, like heavy ceramic plates, being thrown from the kitchen staff at the waiters when they messed up. Okay. Knives were thrown in that back thing. People would quit in the middle of a shift. Like it's crazy chaotic back there in the kitchen. These guys are dumping sweat. They're incredibly busy. Everybody's screaming at everyone. Everyone's angry. There'd be fist fights back there. There were several nights where a waiter just said, F it. Why am I putting up with this? And they left in the middle of the shift. And the boss came to me and were like, hey, I need to pick up those 4 tables in addition to the 4 that you have. And I'd have to go introduce myself to the guests and try to figure out where they were and make some excuse for why their waiter was gone and handle their stuff and my stuff. But I guess what I'm getting at here is that environment was healthy to be in because it forced my brain to adapt, to think ahead, to build up some skills. Whereas in the world we live in now, that would be considered toxic. People would refer to that working environment as a toxic environment, but it was really good for me. Just like you might consider it toxic to try to lift really heavy weights because you're going to be sore the next day. It feels toxic. It hurts, but that's what you have to do if you want to build up skills. So I went into that restaurant industry just thinking I want to be the best that I can be, just like I wanted to be at sports. But the difference is in this world, my physical inabilities, my height, how fast I run, how high I jump can't hold me back like it could in sports.
Yeah, one of the things I love about that experience that I resonate with, and having played sports, is there's this sort of skill focus that I think you talk about in the book as well. That if you want to play offense, I guess let's talk about that one for a second. If you want to make more money, if you want to, this applies to real estate investing as well. When you're trying to buy properties, when you're trying to get money, when you're trying to build partnerships, when you're trying to build relationships, whatever business you're in, there's got to be skills. Before you get into the investing stage, you actually have to be a person who can communicate, a person who can do the things, who understands market value. And in your case, you had to build skills, and you had to have this mindset of mastery, which is a totally different mindset than saying, hey, here I am in this restaurant, I got to figure this thing out. Instead, it's like,
Yeah.
what can I learn? What can I build? Maybe you could talk about how offense applies to that and really any business you're in or job you're in.
It's a great question, and it's why I think most people struggle with offense more than anything else. It's hard to find people that will save their money, but there's more of them out there than people that are good at making money. The average human, as I've learned now that I'm a business owner in America, okay, shows up at a job, and whether they're aware of it or not, they sort of act with a sense of resentment that they have to be there. The average W-2 worker shows up, and their subconscious framework is, how do I get out of doing as much work as I can while making as much money as I can make? So it's very common to be like, oh, that's not my job. You're going to have to talk to the so-and-so department. We've all experienced that when we need something done and you get bounced around from person to person or sent to voicemail, and they're just hoping if I ignore this problem long enough, maybe it will go away. Well, the customer is on the other side of that, and they're angry or they're frustrated. It's not a good experience for them like it is for the worker. If you want to be good at anything, you have to ask yourself, what is needed and how do I acquire those skills? Those are the people that get good at sports. Those are the people that get good at money. They don't say, how do I avoid doing things? They actually take on responsibility. So when I started in that restaurant, I wanted to be a server because servers would make like 35, 40 grand a year, but this was in like 2002, right? So that was kind of like making 80, 90 grand, maybe almost 100 grand a year in a small town as an 18-year-old. That's quite a bit of opportunity to be 18, 19 years old, making that kind of like grown person money, right? But I was a busboy. So I had to learn, how do I do the job of a busboy? And when I get that done, how do I pick up the job of the waiters? How do I help them with what they're doing? Well, what I found was by helping the waiters, which was not my responsibility, I learned how to do the waiter job. So when I went to my boss and said, hey, I'd like to get promoted, and she gave me a quiz, 80% of it I already had been doing the entire time. And she was hearing from the other waiters how good it was. So it was an easy promotion. That principle followed me through a lot of things in life. When you willingly take on more responsibility at whatever job you have, it's like lifting weights for your workout partner. It's easy to say, why should I have to lift that weight? That's their job. But who gets stronger when you lift the extra weights?
Yeah, I'm comparing that to real estate investing. When I got my start, I flipped a lot of houses. I wholesaled, I fixed and flipped. And I remember so many times, wanting to complain about the closing attorney who hadn't done their job with this thing, the mortgage broker hadn't done this step. I just took it as a given that every closing I had to pay attention to everybody's job. Kind of like you as the best boy having to pay attention to the waiters. What are you doing? Can I help fill up the water at the table next to me? That attitude really builds your skills, but it also makes you a ton of money because you're adding value to the entire chain. I feel like now I could be a title searcher, I could be a closing attorney, I could be a mortgage broker, I could be a bookkeeper. I mean, all those skills that you build, then you have confidence beyond the assets and the investments, which we're going to talk about. You have these skills that you could go make money doing 20 different things because you've learned all of those skills.
Yeah, and when you're managing your own portfolio, you're going to do a better job at it because you understand what a good bookkeeper should be doing because you can do it. You understand how an appraiser thinks, so you know how to challenge appraisals, or you know how to find hidden value in a property. What happens is you build the skills of being a good investor by learning all the other jobs, and that's what you're describing. And most investors' complaints are that they just bought the house and it was supposed to work out. They weren't supposed to learn how to manage it, how to operate it. They weren't supposed to learn the ins and outs of what it takes to be good at investing. They watched a 30-second ad that said, here's how to run ROI, buy this turnkey property or go buy this thing and you will just become a millionaire, rather than being told, yeah, that's how the whole thing works generally. But now you got to be good at the specifics of it. Real estate investing is not different than everything else in life that you got to get good at.
Yep. So we play some offense. You played some offense at 18 years old. You continue doing that. You learn skills, you hustle. There's a lot more to it, but you also played defense even before that. And I found it interesting, both when you were in your waiter job and also as a real estate agent or with your law enforcement job, you got pretty good at saving, something that falls into that fitness category. This isn't fun. How do I do this? But you found a way to make it a game and maybe reframe that. So can you talk about, for those who want to save more money and are just kind of stuck in that grind, how did you reframe that for yourself?
That's a great point. Like, I did gamify it without knowing what I was doing. So what I made a goal when I was a waiter that I needed to save $500 every single week. And that meant I had to make more than $500 because I was going to have gas. I was going to have taxes. I had to tithe. I was going to have car insurance. I was going to have a gym membership. So in order to save 500, maybe I had to make 600 or 650. And then I would break that down. That means if I work 5 days a week, I got to divide 650 by 5, and that's how much money I have to make. Well, maybe I went to work and I hit that number, but I'd be thinking, "Oh, tomorrow might be slow. I better pick up more tables. I better stay in close so I can get ahead of where I'm supposed to be." And then maybe tomorrow comes and it is slow and there's nothing you can do. People don't come in the restaurant. Well, I got to go pick up a shift for another waiter because I'm not going to hit my goal. So maybe I'd go pay them $20 to take the night off so that I could come in and make $80 or $100. And other people my age thought I was dumb. They literally, Chad, I'm not exaggerating. Like, they would kind of talk trash and say, David's stupid. Like, he loves working, so he's going to pay you $20 to take the night off. I didn't love working. I loved hitting that goal. I loved winning at that game. Yeah. And I knew, basically the way I was thinking is, I'm going to be in college for at least 4 years. It ended up being 5 because I switched my major halfway through and had to take an extra semester to, like, because I wanted to have a double minor. But it took me 5 years to get out of college. I was going to be there for 5 years, whether I worked hard or whether I was lazy. Okay. At the end of that 5 years, I was going to be out of college with a degree going into what we call the real world. My thoughts were, why would I want to coast for 5 years and then jump into having to, like, get on this treadmill of life and run really fast and try to figure it out when I could be preparing for the season during the off season, so I'm in shape when it comes. And I knew that if I was able to save $500 a week, that translated to $24,000 a year. After 4 years, that's $96,000, right? So it's a little over $100,000 if you just worked hard while you were in college. And what the hell else are you doing when you're in college, right? What do you need a vacation for when you're 21 years old and 20 years old, right? You don't have a ton of life responsibilities. I'm living at home with my parents. My mom's cooking food that I'm eating. I'm sleeping in my bed from high school. My life's not that hard. Why not work, go to school, and then go work afterwards? It kept me out of trouble. It kept me out of getting into bad habits. I don't think any of the people who lived the college experience have a whole lot to show for it than a massive amount of debt. But I was able to get out of college with no debt, my car paid for, and over $100,000 saved up, which became the seed money for the third pillar later because, like I mentioned, I made it a game.
Love it. Let's talk about that seed capital. Something you mentioned in the book that I find interesting is that there's a practical, obviously having your own cash to start something is practically helpful. You have some money to go put in investment, but there's this temptation to, hey, I want to get started with no money down because I don't have any money. But you talk about there's a psychological benefit to having that money and having to do the work to save the money that you did. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you think about, like, a mother who's pregnant for 9 months with a baby, when that baby comes, she's got a deeper connection to it than the father does. And that's obvious to me. She's been caring for it and providing for it and keeping it alive. Every moment of every day, that baby's on her mind. Just be careful of what she does to make sure that the baby doesn't get hurt. She's careful of what she eats. I mean, they're even careful of what they're thinking, right? Because there's literally 2 humans inside of one body. There's a very strong bond that she has with the baby. And dads typically don't build that same bond with the child until they spend time with them. The dads have to spend a lot of time protecting and providing, and then the bond forms because they don't get those 9 months in the beginning. When you go invest your own money into real estate, you have a connection to that money. That's not just $100,000 in a bank account. That is 4 years of your life of telling yourself, no, I will not go party or vacation or take the night off or watch Netflix. I will go at work and duck plates being thrown at my head. I'm putting myself in a crucible of a really tough experience. And I'm like, just like a sport, right? I'm out there bleeding and sweating and grinding and pushing myself to keep going when I want to quit. That's what breeds the competitive edge you have as an athlete, is like, you suffered to get to the point. Now, when it's game time, you want to get everything you can out of it, versus a person who doesn't practice hard, shows up at the game, plays, and then leaves. They're never as invested in the end result as the person that had to work really hard to get there. Yeah. When you're using other people's money, on paper, it all looks the same. When we're talking about it as an influencer, here's your ROI. Here's the money that you're putting in the deal. Where the money comes from, of course, it can come from you or them or somebody else. But when it is your money that you worked very hard for, there's an emotional connection to that money, and then there's an emotional connection to that investment. You are less likely to treat it casually or just say, yeah, let's just buy it and hope and see what happens, like when you're doing it with other people's money. And that's one of the things that I think propelled me on that wealth building journey, is I'm like, I'm not going to mess this up because I worked so hard to get this seed capital. to get into the game. And so I wanted to master real estate investing. I wanted to protect that baby that I had been developing.
Yes, it's literally the energy from your work. That stored energy that you put aside and saved. And so you had $100,000 coming out of college, which is amazing. But then you worked your tail off to get it. You started in the law enforcement career, and you kind of some of the same skills you had. You were working hard. But I want to talk about the beginning of your investment career and just what that journey looked like. And so, what were the type of assets and the type of investing you did early in your career? And then we'll maybe talk about what it looks like these days.
Yeah, it was like 2009, 2010. I bought a property from a buddy that had it under contract, and he was moving away to go to Bible school, and he was going to lose his earnest money. And I had no idea how investing worked, but I just thought, hey, I'm going to need a house at some point. I'll just buy this thing and rent it out until I get married, and then I'll move into it. That was my first rental. And then next year, my mom said, hey, there's a house down the street for us. A sign just went up. You should go take a look at it. I've loved if you'd live closer. Every mom's like that. So I went and looked at the house, and I didn't want to live in it, but I realized, oh, hey, this is going to cash flow better than the one I bought. So I had 2 houses. Now I'm starting to form like the identity of a real estate investor because I've got 2 properties. I wasn't intending to become an investor, but it's starting to form. Next year, my grandma died, and I just bought her house instead of having the family sell it on the market. Then after that, I bought a 4-plex and was like, whoa, this thing cash flows a lot. I should do this all the time. Around that time, California became too expensive to find cash flow. So that's when I became a long distance investor. I moved out to Arizona, started buying houses in the Phoenix area, bought 4 or 5, maybe 6 houses out that way. That property or that area became too expensive to cash flow. I just moved to Jacksonville. So my investing, it really wasn't like this crazy strategy. It was hard because you had to grind to save the money to buy the properties. But once you had them, the properties were sort of on cruise control. Like you bought it, stuff would go wrong. You'd pay for the stuff that went wrong. When nothing went wrong, you'd make some money. But rather than living off that cash flow, I just kept on working and kept on saving money because my idea was to buy more of these properties because I was thinking 30 years down the road, they're going to be worth a certain amount of money. I'm not worried about what they're worth right now.
Yeah. So you're just looking at it as a compounding vehicle. You're reinvesting whatever cash flow you get to buy the next property. What were some of the tools? Obviously, you've become well known now. You wrote a book about the BRRRR strategy, which is kind of putting some of the tools on, putting some of the cash you saved, recycling it. We're going to talk about that in a second. But when early on, it sounds like it was just a little bit more traditional: 20% down, put the cash down, move on to the next property. What were some of the evolutions you took to actually up your game as an investor? Let's talk about that pillar.
Well, in the beginning, it was like you said, I could bust my butt and work 80 hours a week as a cop, 90 hours a week. At one point, I was hitting about 100 hours every single week. And I would just have to save up the money for the down payment. And you're spending a ton of money in taxes when you do that. I was able to buy 2 houses a year, maybe 2.5 houses a year. It was very slow going. And I just realized, like, I can't keep a dead sprint for this long. I have to figure something out here. And I was in the Florida area and I was buying a lot of fixer-uppers and I was fixing them up, and then I would just fix them up and then rent them out. So I had all this equity, and I never heard about the BRRRR method. No one was talking about it. We didn't call it that. What happened is I was just looking at my portfolio. I talk about this in Pillars of Wealth, that you need to be tracking the money coming in, tracking the money going out, tracking what your portfolio is worth. And I was looking at like just the spreadsheet that showed each property, what the rent was, and I typically looked at everything from this cash flow perspective. And I came across this idea that everybody calls return on equity, but like no one was really talking about it at the time. And I just realized, wait a minute, I would never buy this house and put 70% down on it, but I've got 70% equity in the property, right? What would happen if I refied it? And I just did the math really quick. I'm like, okay, it would go from cash flowing 500 to cash flowing 150. So I'm going to lose cash flow, but I'm getting all this money out of it, which would buy me like 2 or 3 more properties. Whoa, that's way more cash flow than what I just lost. And it clicked. Oh, I could just keep doing it this way. So then I literally started to target only fixer-uppers. So I was buying in Jacksonville and I wasn't looking at the properties everyone else was looking at. I was like telling my agent, okay, set your search parameters for 100 days on the market. Send me all the houses that have been sitting there 100 days. And what happened is they were all the fixer-uppers. They were the projects and the problems that nobody wanted to take on. So I started targeting those. And then I went through a couple different contractors till I found one that I was pretty good with. And I just kind of set together a lot of the structure that I have now that I manage my companies, weekly meetings with these people, an agenda on the meeting, where are we at, what's going on. I found that when I met with somebody every single week, I found that if I didn't check in with the contractor, lo and behold, permits weren't getting pulled, stuff wasn't getting done. But when I was meeting with him at least once a week, I was top of mind. So he was always telling his assistant, hey, you need to get this thing going on. And I learned these business principles. And I went from buying 2.5 houses a year to buying like 3, 4, 5 houses a month for a 2-year period.
So you had this tool of the BRRRR strategy, refinancing it, which I kind of lucked upon as well. I only did a couple BRRRR strategies, but it was kind of funny. It was a technique that people did, but then Brandon came and was it Brandon who named it early on? I can't remember. Who named it?
No, Brandon did.
All right, yeah. So we now know about it, and it's got a system, and it's a great book that people want to check out, how to do the BRRRR strategy, a book you wrote. The idea of scaling, I want to talk about that a little bit. You were buying at a pretty good clip, right? And you were growing. And you talked about your motivation at the very beginning. Like when you're scaling your business, when you're growing your business, how do you know, or how do you measure when like you're running a race? Like I'm running too fast, I'm not running fast enough. So it's a pretty tricky thing. I had 2007 was my big huge growth spurt, and I had 33 properties I bought in 1 year, right before the Great Recession. Brilliant, Chad. That was a little too much. It was a little too aggressive. I had to sort of hold on by the skin of my teeth to survive that. How do you look for those who are like in that stage where they already own some properties, they want to use some of these tools to accelerate their growth, they want to use some leverage? How do you walk that fine line between like being too risky, being too aggressive, but also growing, because that's what you want to build enough wealth to actually have some freedom in the end?
I was talking to Brandon Turner about that today, actually, this morning on the way into the office. And what basically came out of that conversation is that I look at scaling or building like baking a cake. There's a lot of ingredients you're going to have to be successful. So a cake's going to need, I don't know, I'm not a baker, but like flour, eggs, sugar, whatever else goes into making a cake. Well, if you have all the ingredients, but not enough sugar or not enough eggs, you're restricted by the ingredient you're missing. So when you think about scaling a portfolio, you're going to need capital. You're going to need knowledge of how to do it. You're going to need a really good contractor for using the BRRRR method. You're going to need financing. One of those things that you're going to need to do this is going to be harder to get than the others. And that's going to be your limit. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. If you don't have the financing, your contractor can't keep up, or you don't have the deals to be able to buy. So what we tend to do is grow in the areas that we like the most. I'm good at getting deals. Let me get a bunch of deals. But you're going to be held back by your inability to find staff that can manage these, or a bookkeeper that can track everything. So scaling is always screwed up because you're missing one or more of the ingredients. They all have to go at the exact same time. And when you're new, the things that will hold you back is usually the capital. That's why I wrote this book. Like that's where the people that are starting, that are trying to build wealth, they don't need to be looking at what Alex Hormozy is doing. That is, or Grant Cardone. They don't have those problems. They need to focus on building the skills that will allow them to scale, and protecting the money that they're going to need to be able to do it. Now, as you start growing, like you said, things will start to break. You'll get a bunch of deals under contract and you don't have a good enough contractor to handle it all. So you need to have tools. I need to wholesale 3 of these and keep 2 of them. I need to fix and flip 2 of them, and I need to keep 3 of them as rentals. You have to figure out what's missing. Well, I don't have enough capital, so let me sell these 3 so I can get capital to keep these 2. And then I have seed money to go buy the next round, or whatever the case would be. But you should just expect that as you're trying to grow and scale, like you said, different ingredients are going to become challenging at different times. And the only way you overcome that as a business owner is by growing in the area where you're lacking, which means you're just going to have to accept you're always going to be having to improve your skills. You're never going to get this perfect system that just keeps repeating itself the way that we describe it when we're teaching the concept.
Yeah. And I would, to use the cake metaphor and kind of keep going with that, the other mistake I see people making, that I've made, is you start trying to mass produce cakes before you actually taste whether they're any good or whether they actually work. So you have to pace yourself a little bit in order to figure out, like, is this system working? And like for us, for example, I got really good at finding deals. I got really good at finding the money, particularly with seller financing, private money, partners. And so green light, let's go, let's build this thing. But until you actually bake the cakes and then figure out that, oh, wait a minute, I've got all these properties and now these things are broken. There's a speed that sometimes if you could be too successful. Right? And so I found like the sports metaphor is good too. Like if you sprint out as a marathon runner and just try to run right from the gate, you're not going to finish the race. So just finding your pace that's like sustainable for yourself, and so it's gonna be different for different people, but a lot of people they look at a Grant Cardone, they even look at, maybe what we're doing and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I could buy 2 properties a month. Hey, look, buy your first property, buy another property this year, and then next year, maybe add another to that, as opposed to just like, I got to be sprinting from the very beginning. It's another one of those, like, kind of, I'm comparing myself to the influencer instead of just finding my own pace here.
That's a great point. And the influencer is actually incentivized to tell you that you should be sprinting, because then they can sell you a course on how to sprint.
Yeah.
The problem is the human body can't sprint for the whole race. So it inherently can't work when you do that. What you can do is learn the fundamentals of running, run a lot, and at a certain point you're like, man, I just ran a mile, 10-minute mile, and that wasn't very hard. I'm barely sweating. I wasn't even thinking about running the whole time. I was daydreaming. I bet I could run faster. And then you can challenge yourself to run a 9-minute mile and an 8-minute mile until you get to where you're at a 7-minute mile and you're like, okay, this is freaking hard. Now you just run at a 7-minute mile until you build up the skills that you're going to need to scale into something else. But you know what never goes away, no matter where you are in this journey, is there's 3 pillars. You're always going to be saving money, making money, and investing. So what that looks like in my life now is I had to hire an in-house accountant, and I have to meet with her twice a week. And we go over profit and loss statements, which are ways of measuring offense and defense. Okay. And if there's money left over called profit, that's like goes into what I could invest in the 3rd pillar. And then I have to look at, well, how do we save in taxes on this? How do I use real estate to shelter that money? How do I use investing to accomplish that purpose? And where can I invest this money? Because you can't just have 700 single family homes. It's very difficult to manage that. So you're going to have to say, okay, I have so many of these houses, it doesn't make sense. Now I have to go invest it in a hotel or in one bigger house or something like that, which means you're going to start over with new skills that you have to learn with that asset class. It is never going to go away. You're always going to be learning these fundamentals. So we should be teaching those as opposed to a little snapshot of the race and saying, well, here's what I did to get there. And then making it look like, well, that's all that you're ever going to have to do. And then you're just fit all the time.
Yeah, the game keeps going on, which is one of the most fun parts about it. I love it. I'm 21 years into this game and still learning and still evolving. But what's kind of cool, and I want to fast forward a little bit. So you started off, just grinding it out, saving money. You invested houses traditionally. You learned some tools. You accelerated. You grew. You scaled. You went long distance, which is another good book you wrote. Eventually, though, you get to these points where you've built up a pretty good portfolio of equity. And at least for me, some of my priorities, some additional priorities I had were, for example, all right, I've got this equity I'm sitting on. I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to lose my money. And I always thought about that early on, but you really think about it when you've built it up. So I want to get your take on risk, on the fact that here I have this portfolio, here I have this equity. How do you think about risk? What are some of the things you worry about? And then how do you try to build your portfolio in a way that you're addressing those?
Oh, this is so good. And I've spent so much time talking about this lately. Disclaimer, I'll just say this. I bought about 18 properties at one time a year and a half ago. And I did really good on the deals. I did good for all the things that I knew about real estate. What I did not anticipate was how much I was going to need my staff that worked with me to handle some of this stuff. And they did not do very well. I also didn't anticipate how different the politics were with the city governments than they were the last time I bought property at scale. I bought a lot of very expensive short-term rentals that I got a great deal on. I did a great job on the rehab. Everything went perfectly for the stuff I knew. I was very happy and pleased with it. What I didn't expect was the neighbors sabotaging me, the constant complaints to the city saying they don't want a short-term rental in their neighborhood. The way that the city basically went and found stuff with these properties that I didn't even do to them and said, hey, you got to tear this down, or, it was like this when you bought it, but that's not our problem. You have to fix it. We're talking about like ADUs that were built or duplexes that were built on the property 60 years ago that they never even cared until it was a short-term rental. So when you scale big like this is the point. It's not what you know that's going to get you. It's what you don't know that's going to get you. That's one reason that I just made a mistake by scaling that big. And I would tell other people the best thing you could do to mitigate risk is don't make any huge moves, right? Just continually make bite-sized chunks. I should have just kept buying 18 properties one by one as opposed to 18 at one time. So that being said, I learned a lot from that I can share with other people. Risk is a thing that you have to understand, just like ROI, just like cash flow management, just like marketing. It is a literal element of business that has to be understood. And you can't win by just avoiding it, because the riskiest thing you could do is not buy anything, right? So it's like this concept that you can't get away from it. I like to, I learned this with like lifting weights or martial arts or something. You can get hurt lifting weights, and people can make the argument, well, I don't want to go lift weights because I might pull a muscle, or I might strain a ligament, or I might drop a weight on my foot, or I could injure myself. And it's true. But if you never lift weights at all and you lose all your muscle mass when you get older, I've seen a lot of studies that have shown that like that's the number one thing that leads to major health issues is a loss of muscle mass, especially in men. Cardiovascular problems, Alzheimer's, like lots of things, right? So the irony is that not exercising is the riskiest thing you can do, even though exercising is something that you can get hurt with. So you have to figure out how to do this. I've learned that one of the best ways to mitigate risk is to look at what the Fed is doing. And I talk about this a lot in Pillars. I think people were surprised that I talked about it this much because it's not specific to just real estate. But 8 years ago, when the government was just creating currency crazy, rents were going up all the time. The value of properties were going up all the time. You know what else was going up? Inflation of all the things we have to pay for. Our food was becoming more expensive. Cars were becoming more expensive, right? So if you didn't buy anything, you just guaranteed to have your wealth eaten up. If you'd made no moves at all, you were going to be losing money because of inflation. So you had to get into real estate, but risk was disproportionately on your side because what you bought, even if you screwed it up, the odds of it going up in value were significantly in your favor. So I look at it like poker, okay? There's no way to play poker that just robotically you do the same thing every single time. Sometimes a pair of eights is a great hand, and sometimes a pair of eights is a terrible hand, depending on what's out there, right? The way that you do really good at poker is when you do have the best hand, you get the biggest pot available. You can't win by just trying to get the best hands because you don't control the cards that come your way. But when the cards do come your way, when you play them really, really well is when you do get at poker. So if you got the best hand out there and you couldn't get the pot built up and you win the small pot, that's actually a loss. You screwed up, right? Investing is a similar thing, right? Like in today's market, we could be plunging into recession. You never know, but it feels like we're closer to that than where we were 8 years ago. In today's market, it's not a guarantee that the value of the asset is going to significantly increase in the next 2 years. It might stay the same. If rates go up, it could even drop a little bit in certain areas, right? So I'm not as bullish on just buy a bunch of real estate. You got to. But 8 years ago, 6 years ago, man, I was screaming at everybody, this is the time to buy. Like it's hard to screw it up right now compared to what it's normally like, right? So risk weighs into that. What is the Fed doing? What kind of market are we in right now? And is it riskier to not buy in today's market, or is it riskier to buy? And then what type of asset should I buy, right? So when you're in a market like right now, Chad, where I feel like we're kind of near the peak and a dip in prices is more likely than it was 8 years ago, I lean towards buying A-class properties. Okay, if you're at the bottom, you just had a crash and somebody wants to buy a C- type property, or even like you want to buy in a war zone, okay. You can probably get rid of it if it goes terrible because the values have nowhere to go but up. But when you're sitting near the top, that is not the time to buy cheap real estate. That's when you want to buy in the best neighborhoods, the best assets. You're not going to get cash flow almost anywhere. So you might as well buy in an asset that's going to not be a headache and is going to appreciate over time and give you some flexibility. I have that perspective all because, like you just said, I'm looking at the environment I'm investing in and I'm trying to figure out where the most opportunity and the least risk is in that environment.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Just quick anecdote, buying in 2007 with my overbuying story and 33 closings and like 50 or 60 units that year. The C-class, the D-class properties that I ended up with were really difficult and really stressful during a recession when people were losing their jobs. And those are the ones sitting vacant and I'm having to, go out there and hustle and try to get rented. A-class properties, B-class properties, I sailed through. I wasn't brilliant. I wasn't looking brilliant in 2007 and 8, but I at least was able to get through them. So echo the asset quality. How do you think about risk with a couple other factors. Number one, cash reserves. Like, how do you think about it for yourself? And number two, debt. This is something when I was on the Bigger Pockets podcast, we talked a pretty good bit about the debt in your portfolio, what it looks like. Not all debt's created equal. So I'm curious about both your thoughts on that.
I like to simplify it as much as possible. Other people like to complicate it. They're like, give me a formula that I can put in a spreadsheet that tells me how many reserves I need to have for every property. Life won't work that way, because if you're somebody who lives well beneath your means and you make great money, you can keep less money in reserves than somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck. They have to have more in reserves. So what I like to think about, if I want to succeed with real estate, there's only one thing I have to do, and that's hold real estate for a long time. And I can amplify those returns if I'm holding real estate in better locations for a long time. So if that's the goal, I'm guaranteed to win if I just buy it and keep it. It frees me from having to get an analysis paralysis of analyzing every single expense on every single property when year one. I don't just get stuck in that spreadsheet magic of which of these 75 properties is the best bet, because I have to get the highest ROI possible. That only happens if you're zooming in on right now. But if you zoom out and you look at the big picture, all these are going to do good. Which one's going to do the best? So which one's going to give me the least amount of headache? Now, if the goal is to buy it and just keep it for a long time, there's two ways that I can mess that up. One is that it won't cash flow and I won't be able to make the payment. The other is that it won't, two things have to go wrong. The first is that it won't cash flow. The second is that I don't have enough reserves. Because even if it doesn't cash flow, if you have reserves, you can weather a storm until it does cash flow. So in order to lose a property and lose it real estate, you either have to sell it without waiting long enough, or you have to run out of reserves and run out of cash flow. So structure your life and your business to where that's hard to happen. Have way more reserves than what you think you need, right? And the more cash flow that you have, maybe the less reserves you need to keep, but the tighter that the cash flow is, the more reserves you get. Well, how do we keep our reserves high? You have to keep making money and you have to keep saving money. When you get to the point where you're like, oh, I got 8 properties, I'm a millionaire, I got all this equity, I'm going to go get myself a big car. I'm going to go get myself a big house. I'm going to stop keeping my foot on the gas pedal of making money. I'm going to start paying for everybody else's dinners. I'm going to start losing respect for the money that's coming in. You're now putting yourself in a position where those properties might stop cash flowing, unexpected repairs might come up, life could happen to you, and you can't keep making the payments, which just means you lost, and all the work that you've spent up to that point is gone. So I like, in my head, to simplify it.
Yeah, I like it too. Yeah, there's different numbers. I remember talking to Scott Trench, and I don't know if he still does this, but he used to have like a year's worth of expenses for everything, like in cash reserves. He was just like this monster cash reserve guy, which is, hey, that works well. I know other people who have a lot less than that, but maybe they make $500,000 a year. So there's different approaches. I often tell people, if you don't at least have $5,000 in the bank when you bought one rental property, you're not going to be able to pay for heating and air unit. Like, so there's like a minimum number, right? You can't go below that. But it's kind of like a Dave Ramsey baby reserve, or baby, whatever you call it, emergency fund for a rental property. Makes sense. All right, so I want to go full circle and go back to your story. Like, we're sitting here. How many years has it been now? Maybe 16 years since you got started. It's been a while, right?
In 2009. So okay. We're getting close to that.
Okay. So you're at a different place now. And I want to go back to the offense, defense, and investing. Has the game changed where you are now, where, at the stage you are, the wealth you've built, the things you're doing? Do you play it differently now where you are now than you did as a brand new investor?
Well, the massive issues that I've had from those 18 properties, like, force me to play things differently, right? Like, the problem with those was, not only have I run into problems with the city, but like that specific issue where the city gets involved, you can't generate income from these very expensive properties that you have. So you're bleeding on your mortgage. You also can't sell them because the buyer would be inheriting all the problems that you have with the permits, and the city won't clear the permits. They just keep finding different ways to say, oh, there's another thing you got to fix, because they don't want to issue the short-term rental permit. Yeah. And even though legally they are not allowed to tell you that you can't do it, they just find a way to just put a bunch of like hurdles in your path to slowly bleed you out, right? So that has changed my approach to a lot of finances, because before, where I was like, man, I'm good, I'm just sitting here cruising, I actually put a very big bet on the table. And there's a lot of other things that went wrong too. I did this right about a month before rates went up. right? So not only did these properties become a headache, but all the businesses that I had that were doing very well stopped doing well when rates went up. I have a mortgage company that was crushing it. Well, when rates double or triple, much less real estate transactions are happening. My real estate sales team went from selling 50 houses a month to like 12. Because when rates went up, people didn't want to sell their homes. We don't have inventory to sell, right? Like a lot of things at the same time all went wrong. And it was a big lesson for me that even though I didn't do anything crazy, I didn't get addicted to cocaine, I didn't go gamble my money away, I didn't go like, get the wrong person pregnant, have them take all my money or something like that. Just a shift in the market that happens so fast can have like a monumental impact on your finances. And it's a really good thing that I had a lot of reserves saved up. And it's a really good thing that I was continuing to focus on offense because I'm now adapting. Like real estate sales is becoming incredibly difficult because there's not a lot of inventory to sell in California. So I'm going to have to adapt and start a brokerage that agents from all across the country can hang their license in, right? Our loan business, the one brokerage, we can't just do purchases and refis. Now we had to go figure out how do we make HELOCs work because no one's going to do a cash out refi out of a 3% into a 7.5%. So we've had to get different loan services, right? I'm starting a property management company because I'm taking back a lot of those properties that I bought during that period of time, the ones that are not having issues with the city. The property manager that I hired to manage them has been terrible. And they've just given me one excuse after the next. And so I'm like having to fight with them to get them to release me out of the contract that we're in so that I can take them over and manage them myself. But since I've been doing that, the properties are improving. They're performing 25% better than when they were with the company in just the first 4 months since I've had them back. So now we're going to be managing other people's rentals, right? That means I have to become excellent at short-term rental management, at short-term rental marketing, at putting a team together that can manage these properties better than what the competition's doing out there. And this is what I was talking to Brandon about, where so much of being good at business is just finding where somebody else set the bar really low and going in there and doing a better job than what other people did. So these principles that we're talking about, I'm still having to use them every day. I'm like, okay, how do I move this into the next space of what I'm doing and focus on offense and defense and excellence in this category?
Well, I love that as a final story because I appreciate your transparency. And this is something that I've talked a little bit about my own 2007-8 experience. It doesn't matter how good you get at the game throws you curveballs. It throws you something different. And it really is the resiliency you have to pivot, to overcome that. And you're in the midst of that. And we all have our own moments like that. So I hope that's a takeaway for everybody, that you build these skills, you play offense, you play defense, you invest, and you also have this mindset of, you're going to have to always be pivoting and adjusting and overcoming. That's part of the entrepreneurship game. Let's not sugarcoat this thing. That's part of the getting to the top, and staying at the top is doing exactly what you're doing. So David, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. I want to give you a final chance to plug your book, plug how people can hang out with you. Most people know you through the Bigger Pockets Real Estate podcast, but I want to give you the final word on that.
Thanks for that, Chad. I appreciate it, man. If you guys are listening to this podcast, make sure you share it with somebody else because Chad's doing God's work out here and more people need to hear this. You can find out about me just going to davidgreene24.com and kind of check out what I got going on. I'm putting accelerator courses together in 2024. So these are like short 6 to 8 week programs meant to accelerate somebody's success in whatever specific thing the course is on. So we're doing one right now for real estate agents because most agents are terrible. The bar's set very low. I've rarely ever found the human that said, I loved my agent. It's very hard to find. And so I've written a lot of books to help real estate agents. Now I'm putting a course together to basically like a boot camp, help kick their butt into shape, teach them all the things their brokers never told them, help them to do a better job and provide a better service in the industry that needs it really bad. And I'll be having more and more of those come out on different topics. And you can go to biggerpockets.com/pillars and get yourself a copy of the book we talked about today.
Awesome. Love it. I'll have links to all that in the podcast description. If you're watching on YouTube, that'll be in the description below. David, great talking to you. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Chad.
All right. Take care. If you like this episode, I think you'll like my next video about how to confidently buy your first rental property. If you're wanting to get into the rental property game, but you're sort of feeling stuck or confused or overwhelmed, this is the video for you because I go through 10 steps, almost like I'm sitting down next to you, guiding you through step by step so that it's not overwhelming, so you can take action on it. And of course, I like to draw it out and explain it to try to make it as easy as possible. There'll be a link above me here and also down in the video description. I'll see you in the next video.